Welcome to the Nonprofit Hero Factory, a weekly live video broadcast and podcast, where we'll be helping nonprofit leaders and innovators create more heroes for their cause and a better world for all of us. Da-ding!
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Nonprofit Hero Factory. Today, I'm very excited to have a consultant on the show. His name is Joseph Barretto. He is a strategic planning consultant. I knew that. He's actually a management strategist with 20 years of experience in the nonprofit sector and the head of Barretto Consulting. His expertise includes strategic planning, fundraising strategy, and leadership and board development, with the goal of strengthening organizations, ensuring their sustainability, and maximizing impact. Joe describes his nonprofit superpower as empathy, finding the right path for organizations by listening more than talking. So without any further ado, let's welcome Joe to the show to tell us what he does. Hey, Joseph, and I'm sorry, I called you Joe without even asking if you're okay with Joe.
I'm okay with it.
Excellent. That makes it easier. So, Joseph, welcome. Tell us a little bit about you. What's your story?
Sure. No, absolutely. And thank you for that introduction. As you said, I'm a nonprofit strategy consultant. Work on strategic plans, facilitate retreats, workshops, webinars. Worked in the nonprofit sector all my career. So that's over 20 years. I don't want to admit that, but it's true. And what I love about it is working with mission-focused leaders and helping them build stronger, more sustainable organizations to maximize their impact, and working with different types of organizations, from social justice organizations, anti-violence, youth development. I'm really enjoying working with different missions and working with passionate people.
That sounds pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So, for those of us like me who don't necessarily know all the ins and outs, since I don't come from most of my life has not been spent in nonprofits. The last 10 years kind of has, but I don't necessarily know all the terms and inside language. What is a strategic plan when it comes to nonprofits?
Sure. So what I work with with nonprofit organizations is strategic planning. But that can be broadly defined, right? Like, people think about the strategic planning process as this very formal process of a 6-month-long thing where the nonprofits go through everything from beginning to end. And I certainly do that with organizations. But that can be intimidating to many nonprofit organizations who don't want to spend or cannot spend the time to do it. So I try to simplify it. Strategy is really about making choices and making decisions for the organization based on your mission and your purpose as an organization, and also based on your capabilities as an organization and what the environment looks like. So I try to liken it to, I remember when you were a kid, you had the decoder things, like you get it from I don't know, maybe it's a cereal box or whatever, and you look at something and it's all these dots and you can't really figure out what it's saying, and then you use usually a red filter, and suddenly, like, the message comes out. Strategy to me is like that, where all those dots and all those different things are the decisions that organizations have to make, or the options that organizations have in front of them, and the filters are multiple. One of the filters is your mission, like, what is your purpose as an organization? Another filter that you put on is what are your capabilities? What's your secret sauce? What are your strengths as an organization? What makes you different? And another filter is what the environment looks like, and what are the needs of the community that you're serving, and as you put all those filters on, then the message comes out, and your options become clear. So that's usually what I do, is I try to guide organizations through that process and figure out what is that path, and how do you make sure that message comes through in terms of what it is that you should be focusing on.
So is a strategic plan something that a nonprofit needs to make very early on in its life cycle, or hopefully it's a very long life, but or is it something that they need to be doing on a regular basis? How often should they be creating one?
Best practices is organizations should always be working off of a strategic plan, right? They should have a plan currently that they're working on so that they know what it is that they should be focusing on. It is a map, a roadmap for you to figure out what you should be doing and what you should be working towards. These days, it used to be that a strategic plan every 5 years was the standard. Now, really, 3 years is what you would like to do, because so much just happens, as we know. So much can happen in 3 years, and you really need to revisit that. I have some clients who come to me and really want a 5-year plan, and I urge them to try to look at it the 3-year, or if they insist on 5 years, I call it the 3+2 plan, where let's look at 3 years and let's look at 5 years, but commit to really looking at it after the 3 years to reassess and see if you can renew it for another 2 years. But really making a conscious effort of reviewing, because so much can change in a little bit of time. But yeah, so I think a lot of organizations, as I said, are intimidated by that process. It doesn't have to be intimidating. It doesn't have to be that long 6-month-long process. If you don't have the time or the resources to devote that, you can do sort of mini strategic planning meetings, visioning that can give you at least the direction that will be helpful for your organization, and working off of that until you can do a full planning effort, I think is fine. So having something currently that to help you with direction is important.
It sounds to me a lot like when I work with clients on digital strategy, or even more specifically, a website. I think there was this expectation earlier on in the life of the World Wide Web that, oh, you build a website and that's it. It's out there. It's your calling card. It's your Yellow Pages entry online, back when that was a thing. And I think the cycle of a website's usefulness and utility without being regularly updated, let's say, has gotten shorter and shorter and shorter with time. We are now responding to things quicker, and the world is frankly moving quicker. It always is, I suppose, but it certainly feels more accelerated lately. And I like to quote Robert Burns: "The best laid plans of mice and men often go awry." Yeah. You could have as much planning as you want for your website, and I go through a very similar process in a strategic digital strategy plan of what is it that you want to look at in the future. What kind of people are you serving now? Who are your avatars? How does this fit with your mission? What kind of programs are you offering, and where might you grow? But then, a little thing comes along, like a black swan event, like, say, I don't know, COVID. And it feels like those actually happen every 10 to 20 years, right? Where those of us who were in New York especially, but all of the US, I suppose, 9/11 changed our worldview, changed so many things. It's like a major quake, and there are plenty of minor quakes in between. Mm-hmm. So can a nonprofit even plan for something like that? Or should they just assume that one of those events will come along and we're going to have to throw everything out, basically, or suspend it all for a while to do something different?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to tell you the story, in March of, I don't even remember when things happened, March 2020, right? In March of 2020, I was getting ready to do about a half dozen strategic plans, raring to go. And then, of course, the pandemic happened, and not surprisingly, all of them got stopped, got dropped. And because how can you plan for the next 3 years when you don't know what the next 3 days are going to be like? There was just too much uncertainty, and of course, organizations had to focus on their emergent needs. It was about scenario planning rather than strategic planning. But then something happened, as 2021, turned and started, and now I'm doing more strategic plans than ever. I think organizations are realizing that strategy is more important now than ever because of events like the pandemic and people having to pivot, and it seemed like 2020 was a year of change for many organizations, not just because of the pandemic, because of the Black Lives Movement, because of the election, all of this happening at once. Organizations are realizing that they are presented with too many options, right? Like those dots that I'm talking about, there's just too many of them. And that strategy is actually useful in helping them focus, right? And you talked about your digital strategy, like in revisiting these things, you always have to think, oh, who's your audience? What are you trying to do? What are you, and for the organization as a whole, that's also really important. As organizations we're pivoting, well, pivoting to what? Like now that we're having to do different things, what's the impact we want to have? Mm-hmm. Is this new thing that we're now doing, because we've had to be reactive, still getting to the impact that we want to have as an organization? Is it making the change that we want to have in the communities, or are we addressing a different need? And maybe that's fine, and maybe that is an important issue to keep in mind. And in which case, how do we fold that into the DNA of the organization? How do we take into consideration all this new information and all these this new reality that we're in? And that to me is what makes strategic planning different from an operational plan, right? Like, this is different from taking what you did last year and adding 10% or 20%. It really is about taking into consideration, like, well, why are we here? What difference do we want to make? And also, what's changed? Like, what's changed with the world outside? What's changed with our world inside? And how do we still have that North Star, that our mission in mind, and how do we fulfill it? Because for organizations, for nonprofit organizations, the bottom line is the mission, right? It's not making money. It's not it's not a for-profit organization. It's that mission. And so really going back to that and using that as a guide is important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sticking to the core of what's your purpose in the world. How are you trying to make the world a better place? Mm-hmm. So that I saw a lot of organizations scrambling over the last year, trying to figure out what programs they can offer or should offer. Their community says they need something. Well, is that your place to fill, or could you find a partner organization maybe to fill that? Mm-hmm. Will your supporters respond to your desire to go into this new direction? For-profit companies, startups especially, are known for pivoting, right? Mm-hmm. Market changes, we pivot because we're responding to what the customer wants. But at some point, you might become a completely different company, and you might alienate the people who have been your customers, or for a nonprofit, it could be clients and supporters all along. How do you make that decision?
Yeah, and that's actually really a really critical point for strategic planning. I always ask this question, which is like, what are you in the best position to do? Because it's one thing to identify all the needs in the community, because you can identify 1 million needs in the community, and you can't address all of it. But what are you most in the best position to address? And I talk to organizations all the time. The urge is to be generalist, like to be everything to everyone. But that's impossible, given the limited resources that organizations are often operating, under. It's really important to be specialist rather than generalist. Like what's the core of the community that you're working at, and what's their specific need that you are best able to address, and for the other things, and if you are identifying other needs within those communities, as you mentioned, like is it that you partner with other organizations? Is it that you try to see how else you can connect them to other resources, or if there's no one else, then you have to prepare for it. Right? Like you can't just say, we're going to just do that because it's a defined need. How do you strengthen like different muscles so that you can address a need that you've identified? And that's part of planning too. What's your core now, and what could be your core down the line? And how do you build that up? for an organization. And an example I see all the time in organizations is particularly with social service organizations, is that their core and their strength is the service, right? Like they provide the service to organizations, but they're realizing that advocacy is a big need within communities, but they want to do it right away. But it's something that you have to build. Like if you don't have the skills within staff, you don't know how best to start it. It's something that is something that you have to build up as an organization, and planning for that is an important thing to do. Maybe partnering with organizations that do it really well. Starting with some trainings or some workshops, and looking to the community to help you with those things, and planning for it.
Change, I feel like, is hard for any person, and certainly for an organization. The nonprofit world often leads the way when it comes to certain types of change, like accepting new social justice issues and norms, but also often lags behind when it comes to responding to change and new technology. As I was telling you earlier, some nonprofits are born digital, some adapt to digital, and some have digital thrust upon them, which over the last year, certainly, I think most nonprofits in one way or another have had digital thrust upon them. They've had to quickly sink or swim, whether it's their gala or actually, like for service organizations, it was really hard. How much of your services can you adapt to digital? If you feed the homeless, right? What can you do online? It makes it very difficult. Mm-hmm. How can they incorporate that into strategy? How much have they been trying to incorporate that into strategy now as you're working with them? Is that the biggest push right now, or is it, well, how do we move past digital and back to where we want to go?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's something that organizations are facing right now. I have a client who, in their current strategic plan, which is about to end, which they did about 3 years ago, they had in the plan to pilot working remotely with 5 employees.
Forward thinking of them at the time.
Exactly. Forward thinking of them at that time, saying like, oh, we should pilot it and see what it looks like. Let's try it with 5, see what sort of like needs, what technology we will need, and see what happens. And of course, 2020 happened and it went from 5 to 200. And so that is it was thrust upon them because of what happened, and luckily for them, they because they were thinking of piloting it, they had the steps that they had to make. They had to scale it immensely right away, and so they had to look for partners to help them with the funding for it and making it happen, and they were able to do it, and that was really helpful. And now they're thinking about, well, what does the hybrid look like now that are we coming back, and what do we now have to look for, and I think that's going to be the thing that organizations are looking to and figuring out at the moment, and it's much easier, I think, to do that now that you've invested in the technology and invested in the procedures, but there are some things that you have to keep in mind about how that has changed the organizational culture, for example, of working remotely, and what does a hybrid organization look like for that. I think for technology, it is a tool and a necessary tool for organizations to use, but how does that affect both the delivery of the services and the impact you have in the communities that you serve, but also with internally, like just organizations and how they work with each other, and perhaps even the need for additional technology to make things work better. That is not just the things that you're so used to using. So many organizations are going into Slack, for example, just as an example, because it's just much easier to do that, and sort of like a way to simulate some of the more informal conversations that you have when you are in person. And so exploring like what those things could look like what's the water cooler talk, and how does that happen for organizations, and how can you use technology to help that and to allow that to happen.
There are actually some really cool tools that it just came to mind that you can simulate a virtual office, because everybody could be in a spatial setting in your web browser, and you could move yourself over closer to someone else and start hearing what they're talking about. So if there are a couple of people talking, the closer you move to them, the more you hear them, the louder they become, and then you could get involved in the conversation. You could share apps, so you could share a Google Doc with a bunch of people sitting around a virtual table, all within your browser. That really, I think, it's been an incredible evolution, rapid evolution over the last year, where we're going from, everything's in person to, everything's on Zoom, to now, hey, we could kind of have that water cooler. We could sit together and have a lunch and learn. We could still have some of that camaraderie and effect, play games together, watch movies together if we want to, right? Which we've been doing on a personal level for a while now. Every streaming app now has it. Now there's tools to really let teams do that as well, to build that rapport.
And that's exciting, right? Like, what's the, how can we use, and again, it's a tool, right? But how can we use that to have better organizations and have better relationships with your coworkers, so that you can have so that you can improve the organization? And what's exciting to figure out, like, what could be next, right? Like, can you imagine like virtual goggles and everything, right? Like,
I don't know if we're going to go full VR, but
why not?
it's out there. It's definitely possible. It's just, I think we still have an attachment to the actual world that not a lot of people will want to sit in goggles for an extended period of time. But I think it's, technology, when used well, can really minimize costs in a lot of ways and reproduce greater results in other ways. I've been reading a lot about how some companies are requiring people to come back to the office at a certain point soon. And I've been reading even more about how people are quitting at just the sound of that. Oh, you want me to come in for a meeting? Bye, I quit. And certainly nonprofits, part of the appeal of working for a nonprofit is that it's mission oriented, but also the human resources aspect of it has, on average, I don't know every nonprofit, been greater, where the paid leave, the access to certain medical benefits is usually a priority for nonprofit organizations, who maybe don't pay oftentimes as well as their for-profit mirrors. So I think it's really interesting, and I'm wondering if you've already seen any of this. If we abandon the large office space, let's say we have an office space for 10 in our nonprofit, or 100 in our nonprofit, and we abandon that space and shrink it down to 1/4 that size, we have less overhead in that regard. The digital version of that costs probably 1/10 of it for a tool like one of the ones I was just talking about. Do we now have more resources to funnel into, right? Our bandwidth has now increased when it comes to finances, to funnel into our programming that will balance it out.
All right. No, I have seen that with many organizations, and precisely for the reasons that you laid out, because it's an opportunity to save and use that money for other things, for the services that we want to provide. But I think organizations are also realizing that it comes with a cost, right? And it could be that connection and figuring out what. How do you minimize those costs of like, what are you losing in going with a hybrid model, and how do you try to minimize that? And so how do you provide the support for the folks that are staying at home, and even if you do the quarter thing, when you do rotations, well, how do you make sure that some people, it's not the same people that you see, and that you actually are connected to other organizations? Or, if you're having a staff meeting and half the people are on the screen and the other half is live, how do you make sure that you're engaging everyone equally? You know, these are the skills that we sort of have to start learning and you know, figure out that you know, what are ways about, you know, to make sure that we're not losing people.
Yeah, for that last one, I think I'd talk to teachers, because I know certainly in our area, teachers are teaching to Zoom while the kids are in the classroom, trying to keep everybody engaged. I don't know how they're doing it. I'm not sure that I could, but maybe there's somebody to bring in as a consultant to ask how to do that.
Absolutely, because it's, I mean, if you're live, like it's easy to ignore or forget the people that are on the screen, and for the people who are on the screen, it's easier to multitask and not really be paying attention. So, you know, what are some engagement strategies that make sure that you know that happens?
There's actually this reverse phenomena from what you were just saying. From my days in theater, I can tell you, if you ever put a video on stage, no one will look at the live actors. There's something about that flicker. There's something about that moving light that all eyeballs go straight to it. And all of a sudden, everybody on stage could be dancing around naked. It doesn't matter because everyone's focused on the video.
Yes, no, absolutely. That's I've seen that used in concerts, right? Like when someone has to change costume, like they put a video on, and it's like, okay, yeah.
Yep, instant distraction. It's so effective. So let's come back, I guess, to strategy. Whether we're adopting new digital platforms, which everybody is, if it's being built into the strategy, how and where does strategy turn into action?
Oh, well, it should be part of the strategy. No, I have this, you know, pet peeve that it's not a strategy until you have an implementation plan, because you can identify like the best goals, right? Like, and that's you start with. You start with, you know, what are your you know 3 to 4 like big goals that you want to have, and then maybe these wonderful things and you know, but you don't hit an implementation plan, and that's, you know, and then you realize, oh, you know, we can't implement this because we need X, Y, and Z. And so it's not, you can have the best goals, but it'll be useless if you don't have the implementation plan. And for me, implementation planning is more than just figuring out what the steps are, and certainly that's important. Like, what are the steps to do the thing that you want to do, and who's going to do it, but also how much is it going to cost. Right, like, and what are the resource requirements? And it doesn't have to be money, and although part of that is money. Like, what technology do you have to buy? What equipment do you have to buy? What, but also human resources. You know, what staff do you have to add on? Or if you don't have to add on staff, if you have the current staff, well, if they have to focus on this new thing, what's the cost of that? What other things can, you know, don't they now have, you know, time to focus on? And many organizations don't think of it that way, and think that human resources is constantly renewable, which is not. I mean, it's finite, right? And so and that's really important for organizations to remember. It's not just you know, asking, you know, more and more of staff, and as nonprofits are often used to asking so much of their staffs. You know, making sure that you realize that's part of the strategic planning is making decisions on what you have to focus on rather than you know, something else. And so that's really important, and laying that out in a strategic plan is really important. Being able to be clear about the steps in the implementation, how much is it going to cost, who's going to do it, and what are the human resource requirements.
That's a great summary of it. And I actually think that if you have something new that you want to do and you don't currently have the resources for it, whether it's people power or financial, it could create a great campaign, assuming that it's in line with your mission and something that your current donors or a whole new group of donors might respond to. Then it's an opportunity to grow, because it's a need, you're filling a need, and you see a great way forward that other people will hopefully resonate with.
Absolutely.
So once you have your plan and you have your, hopefully, implementation as part of it, your steps, your resource allocations, how do you know if your plan is working, because it's great to have this document and it's beautiful and we all hug and, oh my God, that was a great, 3-month exercise in building it. 3 years later, how do we know anything happened?
It goes in a drawer and no one looks at it and everyone forgets about it. I have a client right now where when we were starting, actually even before we started the project, when they were interviewing me as a potential consultant, the board chair asked, "Oh, how often should we be looking at this plan? Should we be doing it, every year?" I said, every day. You should be, a plan should be embedded into the DNA of the organization, and that every decision that you make, every action that you that you take, you sort of just ask, how does this fit into the strategic plan? And so monitoring and evaluation is really another critical part of the strategic planning process, and building that into a plan is really important. What are the things that you're going to be looking at on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, and then on an annual basis? And I usually do that with clients because if you've done this successfully, you have an implementation plan, you have all these steps. Obviously the people who are doing it should know what those steps are, and that usually is done on like a department level, right? And on a department level, you can look at those things on a monthly basis and say, like, okay, did we do what we said we would be doing? And then on a quarterly basis, the strategic plans are under the purview of the board's governance, right? Like they set the direction, and so the board should really be reviewing it at a minimum, on a quarterly basis, and saying, oh, how are those things going? We set out these, you should have these SMART objectives on what you want to what are the things that you want to hit in the implementation of your strategic plan, and are we on target for those things? And looking at that on a quarterly basis, and then on an annual basis, looking at the plan as a whole. Like, are we still going in the right direction? Should we be making any pivots because we have this new information, or something has happened, or did we, and this happens sometimes, do we underestimate our powers? Did we overshoot our targets, and maybe we need to be more ambitious in terms of our targets? And that happens too. And really looking at that on an annual basis, and that's when you look at the next sort of action planning for the next year. So really looking at things on all the time is my answer.
So do you set up, when an organization does a strategic plan, should they have what I call, and in marketing and many areas we call KPIs, key performance indicators, where it's like, okay, by 6 months out, we want to hit this number, which means that by 3 months out, we want to hit this number. By 1 month, we need this number.
Absolutely. And so, when in strategic planning, you said, okay, what are your goals and what are your objectives, right? Like, and so your goals are sort of like usually the nice, beautiful language of like what you want to achieve. And then the objectives are those like very specific things, as you said, like, okay, what are, this is a 3-year plan. By the end of 3 years, what is it going to look like? What are the specific shifts that we want to make? Is it more, better, or whatever it may be, and by how much? And based on that, you can figure out, well, what does year 1 look like, and what does year 2 look like, so that that you're working towards that 3-year goal. And based on that, then you have those KPIs, in addition to actually fulfilling those steps, right? The implementation, and if you have that action plans, then okay, these are the steps that we want to take. And so those 2 things are the things that you're monitoring. And usually with when I do the strategic planning with organizations, is setting up what that dashboard can look like, that they can be reviewing on a regular basis and saying, okay, well, are we in the green, yellow, or red, and making sure that you're clear on what it is that you're going to be monitoring is important.
So I want to be kind of respectful of time, and I want people to hear every word, every important thing that you've got to say. tell me, if nonprofits haven't looked at their strategic plan, or they don't even have one at all, if they haven't looked at it in a while, what's the first thing they should do? What should they do today when they're done listening to this episode?
Well, they should think about it. Start thinking about, what are we ready for? Like, what can we do? And like I said, organizations think of strategic planning as this big, thing that, and if you are ready for that, then go for it. Because I think it's really a process that can result in something transformative for the organization, that can lead you to a specific direction that will get you closer to fulfilling your mission. But if you are not ready for that, there are still some things that you can do, and that can start with something like scheduling a visioning meeting with your board, for example, and trying to look at those things that I mentioned, which is like, what's our purpose, and making sure that we're clear on that. What does the environment look like, and what are our strengths as an organization, and are we doing what we're doing, and what should we be focusing on, and in the meantime, in the next 3 years. And so there are some small things that you can do as an organization, but for me, it's about being intentional about that, and being intentional about looking at your mission and your capabilities, and into determining what your action should be, and not just taking what you did last year and adding 10% and calling that a plan.
So it sounds like there's a lot of work that organizations could do on their own at any time, basically. I'm sure at some point, though, they'll want to bring in a consultant. At what stage should an organization bring someone like yourself in to help them out with this?
It doesn't hurt to just have a conversation. And I do that all the time with organizations, and say like, oh, where are you now, and what does it look like? And I'm, very honest with organizations about like what, little things they can do now to help prepare for a larger process, if that's what they're looking for. But it's really like being, not being in crisis is very important. Like not sort of being able to set aside time to look at things and say, okay, now we're ready. Now we can sort of focus on strategic planning, and that's when you should reach out to somebody to help.
Is there any tool or resource that you recommend nonprofits check out?
You mean like what they should have and really start with? Well, one of the things that has been really important for organizations, particularly now with COVID, is having a clear theory of change. Many organizations will have one, probably because a funder forced them to have one, because a funder asked for it, and then they put it in a drawer somewhere. But if you don't have one, you should really do one. And just briefly, theory of changes is something that connects what you do to the impact that you want to have as an organization, but being clear about the logic of that, and is it actually happening? And I think that is what, when you ask what little thing can organizations do, they can review their theory of change if they have one and update it, or if they don't have one, start one. And that's just a way to sort of like clarify where you are as an organization, and use it as a decision-making tool.
You mentioned earlier something about the Stanford Social Innovation Review.
Yes, it's a great resource for nonprofit organizations. They always have great articles, and it's always just good to know what what other nonprofit professionals are thinking and doing, and what are innovations out there that you can employ in your own organizations.
Cool. We'll be sure to share that and everything that you've talked about in the show notes. If people want to follow up with you, what would you like them to do? What's the best way to get in touch or get on your radar?
Well, they can always get in touch with me through my website, barretto.nyc. Or better yet, LinkedIn. I always love getting linked with nonprofit professionals and doing it that way.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Joseph. I really appreciate it. I think there's a lot of helpful things for people to start thinking about, and actually action steps that they should take in getting prepared for whatever's next, whatever's coming down the pike. But I really appreciate your time today. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I hope to see you again next week when we have another episode of the Nonprofit Hero Factory. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all for watching and listening to the Nonprofit Hero Factory. We hope this episode has given you some ideas and strategies for creating more heroes for your cause and a better world for all of us. Please be sure to subscribe to this show on YouTube, Facebook, iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform.